Hello, everyone.
All right. Welcome to Raptor Migration Q&A.
Yeah, to celebrate homecoming, we figured we'd talk about birds that are going from one home to another home.
Yeah. So I'm Lynn Schofield, and this is...
I'm Sean Peterson. I'm a grad student at the University of California in the Environmental Science Policy and Management Department. And
I'm a biologist for the Institute for Bird Populations, and we'd like to introduce our good friend and raptor expert, Teresa Ely, who's the director of the banding program at the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory.
Hi.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we have about 5 minutes of introductory material about raptor migration. And then from there, we'd like people to ask questions, and we'll try to answer them as best we can.
Yep. And just a very brief intro for people who are new to Cal Falcons, because I know this is sent out for general homecoming festivities. There are peregrine falcons nesting atop the campanile at Berkeley, and they've been nesting for 4 years now. And so we have a live stream on the falcons 24/7. You can always check them out. They start breeding usually in mid-February to March. And yeah, so check them out next spring and look for some new baby falcons on campus. Yeah, let's talk about migration.
All right, is our screen share working there, T?
Yep, I see it, your screen.
Right. So to start with, I'd like to share some video I've taken from one of the greatest raptor migration sites in the world, Veracruz, Mexico. And this here is thousands and thousands of broad-winged hawks all flying at once using some hot air thermals as they head down to South America. So, although raptors are solitary species, they have a very particular migratory behaviors, and that is to look for rising hot air, much like use gliders do, and to ride that upwards, and then to fly downwards looking for the next thermal. So, although they're a solitary species, because they're all using the same strategy, they'll often end up in the same thermals and flying in big groups together like this. And the further you go to some of the bottlenecks down in Mexico, Central, and South America, you start to see that kind of behavior. So, important question, why migrate? And there's pros and cons to migration. The pros are pretty obvious. You avoid the cold. You can find more food in a warm winter climate, and you get the best of both worlds. It means that you can nest far north where there might during the spring be a ton of resources to eat. Voles, lemmings take off during the spring up north, but those habitats are not very favorable. But the con is migrating is extremely hazardous. It can be a very long trip. It's birds going through places that are not their own territory, so they don't know what dangers are there. There's a lot of dangers like hitting windows, getting predated, not being able to find food, weather, climate. So this study kind of demonstrates what you see in these graphs. This is 4 different kinds of raptors. These are from Europe, but this pattern is true all over the place. So any given day during the summer, there's a probability that a bird might die. And then during autumn migration, that jumps up a whole lot. In winter, you're pretty safe again. And then spring migration, once again, that potential for dying on any given day jumps up again because there are just so many possible dangers ahead of a bird. So since we're Cal Falcons, we're going to talk a little bit about peregrine falcon migration. And so these birds balance the pros and cons and actually make a decision, so to speak, on what they're going to do each year. And so on the left here, we have the migration map of Island Girl, a bird banded by a peregrine falcon study, and that bird went all the way from, Baffin Bay to Chile. And so many thousands of miles every single year. And the blue path is the fall route they take, and the red path is the summer route they take. Whereas Annie and Grinnell, the pair that nests on the Campanile, their territory is tiny. It covers some of Berkeley, maybe a little bit of Albany, from the bay into the hills. And that's because they don't need to go looking for warmer climate or more food here in the Bay Area.
Yep, they just stay right there all year round.
But it's notable that Island Girl, who does that migration, she's following approximately the same path every fall and will make some decisions about what path to use during the spring. So how do birds navigate? And the answer is with pretty much every strategy possible. They will use the stars, much like human sailors might. They'll use the setting sun. They can sense magnetic fields, and that helps them calibrate their star map. They can use smells that are familiar, and they will use landmarks. And so any individual bird has a migration route that they try to follow. And there's a few major flyways that birds use. Some that are nesting in the western North America will like to follow along and end up going often along the Pacific coast. There's a flyway in central US, one that follows the Mississippi River Valley, and the ones that kind of go along the ocean and the Atlantic. Now, on the right, we have our Bay Area specific map here. There's a tendency for raptors to want to avoid things like crossing water because they have that strategy. They want to find thermals, which are rising hot air, usually coming up from the land. So they'll end up often going around the bay until they end up right near the Golden Gate Bridge before they cross to San Francisco. And so as you can see, that route ends at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, where they then make the little jump over to San Francisco and then further south on their migration. So that's where the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory comes in, and our fantastic guest, Teresa Ely. You cut me off just a little too soon, Sean. So that Golden Gate Raptor Observatory comes in, and I just want to add this last slide of.
All right.
Oh, never mind the slides.
I got it.
This slide's not that important. I just had a couple good slides of Teresa Ely, who is participating here in the two main kinds of research the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory is doing. One is the hot count, where they're observing birds as they move through the area, which helps to get a baseline on how many birds there are, the health of the population, and change in numbers. Whereas the other thing, you're seeing Teresa Ely putting a bird band onto a Cooper's hawk. And those bird bands is how you can, if you get a writing of that bird, that means you have an understanding of what that bird's travel route was. And also, while that bird is in hand for the banding, you can weigh the bird, see what kind of health they're in, see if there's any changes in over time, the average weight of birds, the average health of birds, the average measurements of birds, which helps to understand other changes going on in the bird population. So that is my introduction. For GGRO, Teresa, would you like to expand upon all the great things that GGRO does for migratory birds?
Yeah. Well, I just also want to comment on the photo. I was at and oh gosh, in 2000, and we're still doing the same thing, which is one of the great things about Golden Gate Raptor Observatory is that we are a long-term monitoring program of the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. And so we are still continuing these same techniques, which keeps all our data very consistent throughout, the years, and helps us study populations, analyze, and ask questions about other topics. So one of the things that one of the projects we have worked on is looking at the presence of rodenticide poisons in some birds. And so not only are we collecting this long-term data about populations, we're also taking a deeper dive into what's going on, like in a bird's, like, how are the birds doing? How is their health? If that makes sense. And I'm trying to think of. So your question, Lynn, was what other projects? Sorry.
Just more introduction about some of Golden Gate Raptor Observatory's missions, what you do. I know the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory has some great educational programs that which have been shifted a little bit in the last year here, but yeah, tell us maybe about migratory stories or the hot that will hopefully be going on again next year.
Yeah. Well, before I get into migratory stories, since I was mentioning how these pictures are from my intern year, GGRO is a really awesome program because we have interns, and each year, except for not this year due to COVID and the pandemic, we have interns that help us in the field along with all of our other volunteers. So we're not just a small group that collects data. We're actually a very large group of community scientists and interns that we train to help collect this data, so that we have, I think, give or take 300 volunteers who help us collect the data, and they come from all sorts of backgrounds and walks of life. And so we help involve people who just love raptors to get closer and help us study them. Migratory Story started a few years back, and that is a program that works with schools. They study migration, and they will come out for a field trip to the headlands, and they learn about how we collect the data, how birds migrate and how people also migrate. So it's a really good program that's really, I feel like, really started taking off in the last couple of years, and it gets kids involved in learning about raptor migration early on in their life, which is always good. So that's just a couple of the programs. And we do hawk talks when we have more normal season. We have presentations on the weekends during the fall about we have a hawk talk, and we talk about raptors migrating, and it's up there on the hill. Our interns usually present, and sometimes some of our volunteers who want to be involved in that aspect, they can as well. And what's great is that on the hill, when you're talking about raptors moving, you're in the migration, so you can point out these birds and what's moving through, and talk a little bit more in depth about each species movement and life history. And also we have a what we call a raptor release, where we bring a very, very recently banded bird up to the hill, and then talk about whatever species that is in the banding process in person. And then we'll release the bird up at top, where our docents and interns are. So, so it's just a couple.
If you ever have a chance to go visit Hawk Hill during migration season, please take that chance, because it is just wonderful and amazing. And it's a really awesome, like, kind of natural moment that you get to experience right here in the Bay Area. So If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we've got
love to do some answers to personal questions. Teresa, do you have a question to start with?
I have one other note. So we are currently collecting data, migration data on Hawk Hill. So if you do, if you do want to take a trip in the near future here to Hawk Hill to check out the migration, part of the Hawk Hill where the volunteer counters are is fenced off for COVID precautions, but the rest of the hill is accessible, so you can still come up and watch birds. It's just there's a certain area where our volunteers are collecting data, and so we have some added fencing in place to make sure that we're following specific guidelines, so that way we can collect data safely. So I just wanted to make that note.
So let's start with our first question. Hawk Hill migration is in the fall. Can you tell us more about fall versus spring migration, Teresa?
Sure. So, well, especially for our site, we have about an average of 25,000 raptors is what we count. About an average of 25. Yeah. I'm double checking in my head, 25,000 that we count on average migrating. And a lot of the birds that are moving that we see are young birds, juvenile birds. We do see adult birds migrating, but a lot of what we count are the kids. And they're all dispersed, they're all moving south during this time. And so it's pretty large, but during a spring migration, when the birds are moving back up, because of that, what Lynn showed in that graph, you have some mortality, added mortality rates. So the spring migration is a little bit smaller, and birds are dispersing to breeding grounds. So that it's not as grand as in the fall. That spring migration is not as grand, but birds still move up, and we do have a very, I don't want to say unofficial, but we have a couple individuals who do help count the birds moving through in the spring.
Yeah, so I'd like to expand upon just fall and spring migration have sort of different dynamics. And a lot of times birds will use different routes between fall and spring for a couple different reasons. One being that fall and spring will often have very different winds. And so for the fall, it's much more advantageous for a lot of the raptors and a lot of species of birds to go closer to the ocean and then just follow the ocean south. And that's actually the strategy that young birds especially like to do, because that's the easiest way for them to navigate. On the other hand, spring, it's older birds with a little more experience a lot of the time, so that's more birds taking alternative routes. The winds are different, and also birds have different priorities between spring and fall when they're migrating. In the fall, they want to go the path of least resistance and what's easy, even if it takes maybe a little bit longer to get down there, whereas in the spring, they want to get back to their territories as quickly as possible, and that sometimes means a different route.
All right, next question, and this is a couple of people asked. So about what time is the best time to go to Hawk Hill to look for birds, and what are there regulations on parking or etc.? And is there camping nearby?
Okay, good question. So for the first part, the best time to arrive is, for the birds, let's say for the first part of this question, the best time to arrive for the birds is, 9:30 or 10. The temperature started to increase and birds are using those thermals and that wind to move. And for parking, I guess I would actually say the same thing. The earlier the better, especially if you're going on a weekend, because weekends in the Marin Headlands get really, really busy. So if you were to come out on a weekend, I would recommend, coming around 9 or so and parking at the top of the hill, and you can always hike around a little bit before setting up your scope or whatnot. And then, you should see a pretty, well, we're kind of past the peak of migration, but birds will move throughout the day. And like our volunteers, they're usually up there until 3:30. After that time, the birds kind of slow down. Not that you won't see birds still migrating, but it's just not as busy. And then for parking regulations, in the headlands, no fees to park. Just make sure to look at the signs about where to park is okay and where not to. One note on that, there has been, in the past few years, some break-ins in cars. So I would just make sure to take your valuables with you. I'm just saying, I don't want anyone, losing a window. That's happened to me. And nearby camping. Oh,
so I can field that.
Yeah.
So the Marin Headlands themselves does have some camping, although these are very popular campsites and sometimes to reserve quite a ways in advance. But one of the campsites is called Kirby Cove. It's down in a little hidden area in the beach. And that is a very nice spot. And then there's a couple hike-in campsites that are a little less popular because, it takes a little more effort to get out there. But yeah, you can reserve those if you're probably maybe a month in advance. You can get those reserved in the summer and potentially with a little bit later reservation time relative to when you need to book. And those are only about, a mile hike in for the most part. Otherwise, there's camping at a couple of the nearby state parks, like Mount Wildfires State Park. So yeah, that's all right. And then another question we have is, and I can just field this, where exactly is Hawk Hill? And it is directly north of San Francisco. You cross the Golden Gate Bridge, and that green area you see, the spot that pretty much every film that's, taking a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, that is Hawk Hill. So it's first exit after you cross the bridge, you
Alexandria.
follow the signs, go through a tunnel, and go to the top of the highest hill. So it's in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
All right. So next question is, why do the birds fly to Chile? And actually, not all migrants fly to Chile.
Yeah, we'll start with that map I showed was
that was one bird.
That was one
migrated.
individual's choice. Although, so different species will have different migration patterns that they follow, and some species, the individuals will all go to a very similar area. For example, Swainson's hawks, almost all of them go to the Pantanal region of Brazil pretty well. So these wide open grasslands, believe it or not, the species of hawk during the winter, one of their favorite things to eat is grasshoppers. So these big grasslands in South America are the perfect spot, and it can support a whole lot of these wintering birds. On the other hand, things like broadwing hawks, which migrate in big numbers, they'll find areas all the way from, what's the furthest north, Mexico through Central and into South America. And their different individuals are pretty much looking for their own winter territory. Just like they have summer territories, they will find winter territories that they defend. And so where they migrate to is partially based on genetics of the general area they go to, and then the specific spot is where they can find a place for themselves.
And birds are often very reliable for where they go. So you'll see the same individuals traveling to the exact same winter territories year after year.
All right. Let's see. What are, let's see, we have an easy question. Do all volunteers need to have a scientific background to be a GGRO, Teresa?
Nope. Nope. We have, so we've been doing this for counting and banding hawks for over 35 years. And we have taken volunteers, like I said, from all different backgrounds. We have people who, let's see, work on landscaping. We have people that work on planes and just all sorts of different backgrounds. And for each, so we take volunteers for the Hawkwatch program every year and for the banding program every other year. And so every year we're doing all sorts of trainings. So that way everybody can be starting on the same page, basically with the same skill set. So our volunteers go through Raptor ID trainings. There's a number of those that they have to attend. So these trainings are mandatory to be a volunteer because we want to make sure everyone is on the same page and collecting data correctly and has that basic skill set of IDing birds. And then once the field season starts, then there's a lot of learning in the field. And we hope that our volunteers will stick around for, I want to say 20 years if possible, but we have some of our volunteers have been with the program for over 30 years. It's amazing. It's definitely a raptor community, but no scientific background needed, just a love for birds, love for raptors, and to be able to commit to a schedule is a big part of it too.
All right, so next question is, do Bay Area peregrine falcons migrate or do they all stay year-round?
That is a great question. One we don't have a perfect answer to. We know a lot of them stay year-round, but there's a gap in knowledge, especially with juvenile birds, where we don't know for sure if they stay or if they migrate. Some of them stay. We had, like, for example, Laurentium, one of our favorite chicks from 2 years ago, was caught in the fall at Golden Gate Raptor Observatory in the headlands, and then was sighted on Alcatraz in, I think, January. So she stayed the entire winter. She never left. But we don't know for sure that none of the juveniles leave.
Yeah, and so to expand upon this, so right now in the fall, if you see a peregrine falcon moving through, that bird might be a migrant from, all the way in Alaska and is not going to stay in the Bay Area. So you will see a lot of migrating peregrine falcons. And the reason that a lot of those peregrine falcons moving from Alaska aren't stopping here, even though it's very nice, is that all the territories are taken up by other peregrine falcons. And then the other thing about migration is migratory behavior is a mix of, we'll say, decisions based on the conditions available, but also there's a genetic component to whether or not a bird's predisposed to migratory behavior and these ones that have the plasticity in their behavior. And so that means that some individuals are just inclined to migrate. And the story of peregrine falcons is that most of them were lost due to, overuse of pesticides in a lot of places. And they were reintroduced from a captive population, and those birds were from all over. And so some of those birds have that predisposition to migrate that others living in the Bay Area maybe would or wouldn't, more likely. So, all right, and then here's a question we have. Anne here, she lives in the coast in Southern California. What raptors might she see migrating? She sees red-tailed hawks, but don't know if they nest here or are migrating or both. And we watch Sean for just a bit because our son Vireo is not napping as much as he normally might this time of day. But anyways, you can take this one, T.
Sure. I think Vireo's just excited about migration too.
He is. He's named after a migratory species, so you know he feels it.
So, for raptors that you might see migrating, red tails might be migrating. They are one of these. They're one of the species that also some of them migrate, and some of them might choose to be more. Choose to stay more local, right? So
the word that's often used for that is a sedentary population, even though they're, active within their own little territory.
So there's I feel like quite a few in California, right? We have this more I don't know, kind of a nicer climate than maybe back east. And so we might have birds that tend to stay or not migrate as far, but red tails migrate. And we also have right now actually is a good time for migrating turkey vultures. We are seeing a big pickup in turkey vultures right now through the headlands, and they're going to be migrating south, and you probably see lots of those in Southern California. Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are migrating. Let's see, what else are you going to see?
Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are probably notable because a lot of times people will comment, I saw a raptor in my backyard, what is it? And a lot of times it's either a Cooper's hawk or a sharp-shinned hawk. They're pretty similar looking. One's larger, the Cooper's hawk is larger and the sharp-shinned smaller, but they're forest hawks adapted to hunt in and around trees. And yards have lots of songbirds that they love, and kind of the treed area with some open spaces to navigate around. So Cooper's and sharp-shinned hawks, keep your eyes open for them, and many of them are migrating through around this time of year.
And I think for people new to birds, Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks are often called falcons. They look really fast. If you think of like a red-tail hawk, it just looks like kind of stocky and bulky, but Coopers and sharp-shins are very thin and they just look fast. So I think a lot of people think that they're falcons.
Yeah, they are speedy, but their speed is a flapping flight through trees and complex habitat, whereas falcons for the most part they like open areas and to be going straight on without barriers to slow them down. And so for falcons, then we can move on to that. Southern California, you seeing peregrine falcons flying through, American kestrels, which are a very small, one of the smallest falcons in North America. Are they smaller than bat falcons?
I think.
Anyways, they're definitely the smallest falcon you'll find in the United States. And then there's merlins, which are another small falcon. They kind of look like mini peregrine falcons. Let's see. And then ospreys, someone mentioned that ospreys are flying through. They're the large, they're referred to as fish eagles. Sometimes they're obligate fish eaters. They're not an eagle, but kind of that size. And yeah, and then we have someone who's asking about, let's see, there. Who's asking about European birds, and they see a lot of buzzards. Do they migrate? And this is a much trickier question for us because my knowledge of European birds is not firsthand for sure, but common buzzards do migrate, and there's a lot that go through. I think, let's see, the kites migrate. I know for sure there's a couple really great areas to see European birds migrating. such as at the Strait of Gibraltar. It's that same phenomena where birds have a big barrier that they want to go around and end up at the Strait of Gibraltar.
And Israel is also a huge one for European birds.
All right, and then just someone with accelerated accipiters versus faster falcons. You're going on a straight line. The accipiter, those forest hogs, that's the speed. Falcons are faster when they get that open dive. All right, so let's see. We haven't covered this. Is there a specific destination at the end of migration for each species? Might they find a place they like and just stop there? What starts the reverse migration back north? So that's 3 parts I guess we touched a little bit on. Is there a specific destination? And some species, there really is a specific destination, like the Swainson's hawk that are going to the Pantanal. But others, it's a lot less specific. There will be individuals that will find a place that looks suitable and stop there. That's not atypical of things like red tails. And then what starts the reverse migration back north? And that one, there's a lot of cues that birds are using to determine when the right time to head back north is. It's a combination of the length of daylight. It's when winds end up sort of favorable, food availability, but I think primarily day length is the cue.
And this is one of the kind of major concerns with conservation in the era of climate change, is what's called a phenological mismatch, where birds are leaving their wintering grounds based on day length. So that's kind of a set in stone timing that they're using. It doesn't change with climate. But the productivity in their summering grounds, that is based on climate. So what you see are plants are leafing out earlier, insects are coming out earlier, the whole food chain starts earlier, but the birds are relative to the start of spring ending up later and later because they're using day length as a deciding factor on when to leave the wintering territory. So that is a concern for conservation with a lot of species of migratory birds.
All right, so question for Teresa. Where can we see current counts from GGRO? That's posted on the GGRO website somewhere.
Yeah, so if you go, if you Google GGRO hawk count, or let's see, it's under, you'll find it on the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy website, but it'll be quicker if you just put GGRO hawk count. We also do have a Twitter feed, which is GGRO_raptors. And if you search for that, so that is posted when we're doing the count. So like I was mentioning earlier about COVID restrictions and whatnot, we actually this year aren't doing the count on the weekends. And so you won't be able to find something from this weekend, but we do count Monday through Friday. And so that's when you'll see them posted. So there'll be a couple days missing just because of the protocols that are in place for this season. And hopefully next season we'll be able to count throughout the season. And then also when you go to the GGRO website, there are links to publications and articles. And so I actually have it right here in front of me. So I'm just gonna like show the publication. So this is our annual Pacific Raptor, and there's a PDF version of it on the website, and you can read about the work that was done over the past year. There's lots of good stuff in there about just different stories, different articles, and the count season summary of what the totals will be in there as well. So, hey, Virio.
All right, we have a question on the Cal Falcons specific. Anything on redwood, sequoia, and poppy yet? And we have not heard anything. So in the Bay Area, our bander Zika has said that there's about 18% of the birds she bans are recovered or reported. So that people will recite about 18% of the falcons that she bans, which is incredibly high. Like bird banding, that's like
beetle in the entire continent of North America.
Yeah, and banding songbirds. I've banded thousands and thousands of songbirds and had one ever recovered
outside of the banding
location.
Yeah, you often ban songbirds for different reasons that you ban raptors.
Yeah.
But also, I just want to make a mention, to find out where poppy, sequoia, and redwood are, we need people to, bird watchers and bird enthusiasts to be keeping their eyes open.
Yep.
So these birds have bands on their legs that, through binoculars, you can read the numbers on them a lot of the time. And so if you find a bird with a band that you can read the numbers of, you should report those to the bird banding laboratory, and if you Google that, you'll find a website with instructions. If their instructions are confusing to you, you can contact us and we can tell you the instructions for how to do that. But that's a piece of science that citizen science, community science bird watchers can participate in.
I'm going to put a plug for there's a lot of red tails that we've banded that have color bands as well. And we've also been doing a turkey vulture project studying their movement ecology. And there are a handful of turkey vultures out there with blue patagial wing tags that can also be reported if you do see one.
Yeah, I'm going to ask... So, Teresa, why is it that you have bands on the peregrine falcons and red-tailed hawks, but there's wing tags on the vultures?
Well, that's a great question. And so, if little or well-known fact, I feel like this is a well-known fact, but it might not be known to everybody. But vultures have an tendency to, not tendency, but they poop on their feet. And so they do this for a few reasons. Vultures are really, really cool birds. I just have to throw that out there. But they will poop on their feet for a couple of reasons. One, to help with thermoregulation. It cools them off. As well as it's highly acidic, so it will kill bacteria and all the grossness of the stuff that they've been stepping in while they eat, because they are scavengers and they eat carcasses, so they're eating rotting flesh. And animals die for many different reasons, and some of them, may have died from certain diseases, and that poop actually will kill the bacteria on their feet. And when they are eating around a carcass, if they poop, it also helps kill the bacteria that is on the ground as they're pooping. So that could potentially build up if they were banded. So if they had a band on and they were pooping on their feet, it could lead to some problems. So that's why they get patagial or wing tags, just like condors do. And that's why condors get wing tags.
Yeah, because condors are just big vultures, essentially. All right, and so next question is one that I've heard a lot lately, and so I'll try my best to answer this question. Are there any studies or evidence about how the rampant fires on the West Coast are altering migrations, and how are the fires affecting bird populations? And so this is a very complex topic, and so the first part of the question I'm going to answer with the link between bird migration and the fires is essentially not studied in a very systematic way at all. And one of the things is to understand any individual's change in their migration in response to the fire, you'd have to already be tracking that bird for some reason and happen to have a fire happen at the time that you're conducting some study. Oh, look, my son gave me a cookie.
Aww.
So good at sharing. So on the more broad level, you'd have to use data from somewhere like the Golden Gate Raptor Observatory and look at how that changes in relation to these fires, and that's something we're hoping to do. But it has not happened yet, so stay tuned. Hopefully we can see something about it. And then just how are the fires affecting bird populations? Different species have different relationships to fire. And so some things like Sierra Nevada species, when the forest is lost, they have some tolerance to that because it's an area that has always and consistently burned, but there's a threshold for what they can tolerate. On the other hand, there are some species, grassland species, the fire might be really advantageous because it opens up space, it keeps the grasslands open. I mentioned how the Swainson's hawks like to eat grasshoppers a lot of the time, and so about a year after a fire is a great time for grasshoppers to start exploding. So it depends on, on this broad scale, how does the fire affect birds and their territories, after that first year? It depends on the species, their relationship to fire, how the characteristics of the fire might differ, because some fires are hotter or bigger than others and might cause different sorts of changes on the landscape. So that's my attempt at an answer there. All right, and now let's see some more questions. All right. So I'd actually be interested in Sean, since. Hi, Sunshine.
Yeah.
Do you want to sit on the lap and answer questions with us? Sean, this question is for you from me.
All right.
Because you've done a little bit of studying here. It's so I kind of listed a few of the ways that birds navigate, and include stars and the magnetic field of the earth and smell and landmarks. And one I didn't have on that little slide was infrasound.
Yeah.
And so how do birds, what is infrasound and how are birds using that? Tell us about it.
So infrasound is ultra low frequency sound. So something that is too low for humans to hear. And
Mr. Cookie Eater.
but it is audible to birds, and a lot of birds use it to navigate. And what's interesting is infrasound travels incredibly long distances. So you can hear infrasound from thousands and thousands of miles away. So birds actually use infrasound, the sound of waves, to detect the ocean and follow the coasts.
And also, rivers will have an infrasound signature, and then approaching storms might have an infrasound signature. So that's not something they're using to navigate, but it's something they're using to make decisions about when they should keep migrating and when they should stop. Let's see. So another question we have here is this viewer is in Western Europe, and they're seeing more and more birds of prey in cities. Is this because their natural habitats are diminishing? Is this also the case in the United States? And
this is a really great question. It's a little bit of both. There's a lot more cities expanding into natural areas, but birds are also adapting to city habitats a lot better than we expected in many cases. Peregrine falcons are one of those examples. No one really expected that when they recovered, they'd end up being heavily in cities. So it was really kind of amazing to see them thriving as they have.
And in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense that peregrine falcons would favor cities because tall buildings, that's like a awesome, safe cliff to nest on, just like a peregrine falcon would, and pigeons are a perfect food source. But actually, in some of the earliest attempts to reintroduce falcons into the wild, people were doing it in, for example, river bluffs. And these young falcons would go into the wild for the first time in their life and not be totally sure what to do. And great horned owls would find them and catch them. But that danger isn't there in the cities. And so that's another thing. Cities provide food, and they also provide some level of safety from predation. So, yeah, also because of rodents too, I guess. And that is true, and that is a reason that the use of rodenticides is a big problem, because if you're getting rid of rats with poison, there's going to be a lot of poisoned rats. Hi, what did you grab? Poison rats that are easy targets for raptors because they often take some time before they're actually eliminated. And so they're carrying around these pesticides and poisons, rodenticides in them for a long time. All right, so here's an interesting question that I saw come up twice, so I don't want to ignore that one accidentally. So what are some signs when the birds are angry? And I'm going to guess this is in reference to, we banned the birds as one of the ways that we're studying the birds. So they are trapped during migration, and quickly measurements are taken and bans are put on. But of course, you have to be very sensitive when you're handling a bird of the state of the bird. So how do you know that a bird is okay and things are going well? And how do you know when a bird is angry and not suitable to be banded?
Are you?
And I'll give this one to you, T. Otherwise, I can take it on.
On my end, it cut out a little. I wasn't sure if you were passing it to me or going to take it.
Gotcha. Hopefully, that's not a problem for everyone.
I don't know. So we look for specific signs of stress when we are handling the bird, and we also take into account the weather and what else is going on around us. So because certain things can cause stress. So for example, like we don't band birds when it's raining. We don't catch birds when it's raining. We don't want to catch one while it's wet and then interrupt, we want them to be able to roost and be dry. So, but back to the original question, signs of stress will include if the bird feels hot. Sometimes, each bird, each species is different and can handle like being held for X amount of time. So like falcons might be, or accipiters, the sharpshin and Cooper's hawks might be a little bit more prone to stress. And so we will monitor temperature just by using our hands. So we don't wear gloves when we band the birds. And that's really to help so that we can feel how hot they are. If they're too hot, well, not too hot, but if they're getting warm, we're going to notice it and we're going to get them out of the blind before they get too hot. They can have their mouth gape. If you've heard of a cooler flutter, you might see that when birds are really hot. I've seen it, especially, the ravens I'm thinking of on Hawk Hill that hang out.
Yeah. So not ones that we're catching, but ones that are just sitting out in the sun.
Yeah. So they have this, they'll breathe faster and they have this movement in their neck, and that is a sign of stress, that the bird is under stress. So, and then if a bird drools, then we're gonna pay attention to that. That could be a sign of stress. And so, like I was trying to say, with each species, some are going to show signs of stress in different ways. And so one of the things that we do is we try to make sure to monitor and train all of our volunteers to look out for those signs.
Yeah, and I think actually that's, one of the things that GGR really focuses on is bird health and being sensitive to knowing what you're seeing in the birds, what the behaviors all mean, and how to do things quickly and
efficiently
and safely.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question here. Since a lot of birds migrate to South America, how easy or difficult has it been to compare and collect data with your counterparts? And I can field that a little bit because I've worked in partnership with some groups in Mexico, and so has Teresa. And I'll let you start with that, Teresa, because your official business is a raptor observatory.
Oh, well, so compare and collect our data with counterparts. And so I guess I'm thinking, so a lot of the techniques that we use to collect data are pretty similar among migration stations. And there is this whole raptor research network. And we, for me personally, I talk with other banding managers at Hawkwatch International. They have a number of sites in the West. Also Intermountain Bird Observatory in Idaho. There's also Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory in Minnesota, Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Cape May Bird Observatory. There's a lot of migration stations, big, I think, well-known migration stations, and we do we talk and share.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your research has involved combining data from all these places and looking at how American kestrels have changed through time in different regions. So, I mean, you yourself are using that data.
And it was, and with my experience for like banding, we're all taking the same measurements, let's say, of beak. We're measuring the beak, we're measuring the length of the wing, and these techniques are standardized. And so knowing how the different stations collect their data, you can then sort out, well, okay, they might count in a little different way than we count. We have a quadrant system, whereas some other sites might have just 2 people counting because the migration line that they're in, the birds are really moving from north to south. Some of our counting on Hawk Hill, birds tend to kind of circle around a bit, and so we're not double counting or trying not to double count. And so knowing how the other organizations take their data, then you can kind of pick and choose, like, okay, I'm going to use this for my research question, maybe not this, but maybe that other thing can be used somewhere else. So, and same with our friends down in Veracruz. They have similar data collection techniques, and so that's keep an open communication.
Yeah. All right. And then we have a Cal Falcons specific set of questions here. And one was, Annie was panting yesterday. I thought it was being 88 degrees in Berkeley. And yep, that was definitely due to it being 88 degrees in Berkeley. And, Falcons panting, it's the same thing as dogs are doing when they pant. It helps thermoregulate. But also wondered if maybe she was protecting the nest from an intruder, because there's a lot of squawking right before she left the railings and went to the nest. And the answer is, it's possible it was an intruder because, as we said, there's falcons migrating through right now. But it could have been Grinnell. They're very vocal with each other when they see each other. And it's mostly, pair bonding, contact calling. It's them communicating, and falcons communicate loudly. So let's see.
I think we got time for one last question.
Yeah, time for one more question. So when raptors are migrating, do any species do this as a group or solitarily? Do mated pairs migrate together? And so this is a bit of a difficult question as far as do mated pairs migrate together, because not a lot of studies have attempted to track 2 mated pairs and see where they go. But for the most part, raptors So a raptor migrates solitarily in that it is traveling in the way that is most efficient for itself and not trying to follow another individual. Like geese are going in a flock. They want to be together with their, other members of their species. So raptors are doing what's best for them. They're essentially migrating independently, but the best route is often one that's the best route for a lot of individuals. So you'll see a bunch of raptors sometimes migrating in a big group. Okay. All right, Sunshine. Are you telling us that it's getting time to wrap it up?
Yeah. So often birds will migrate the same pathway. But yeah, maybe we'll sign off. So we'll say bye. You want to say bye?
You want to say bye?
Bye, Mario.
Thanks, Teresa, so much.
We've got one more. Just someone says, "Love my Cal Falcons T-shirt."
We've got those on sale for 2 more days. If you want
to show your Cal Falcons love, and we're going to be using the money, the proceeds from our Cal Falcons T-shirt to work on, in partnership with the Lawrence Hall of Sciences, to make educational material for educational curriculums and potentially some stuff for the museum itself. So that's where the money is going, alongside just helping keep Cal Falcons running, get the cameras maintained and going, and but yeah, so grab a T-shirt. Yeah, they're pretty cool.
And big thanks to Teresa and Golden Gate Raptor Observatory for talking with us about migration.
Yeah, and if people have an interest in volunteering, you can find out more on the website. There is a link. We did not accept volunteers this year due to the COVID, but hopefully in the future we'll be taking on more volunteers. So just wanted to say the information's there on the webpage.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.